I walked into the lobby of the company where Derek worked on a morning when I hadn't planned to be there. I only meant to drop off something he'd forgotten in the car. I wasn't expecting to meet anyone. I didn't plan on anything except walking right back out. But the moment I stepped through the glass doors, my eyes stopped on the sign standing in front of the reception desk. A white board, black letters, simple like a safety notice. Family Day, spouses must check in for verification. I stopped, not because I was surprised, but because in that second, I understood what Derek had been avoiding for the past year wasn't a busy schedule. He'd been avoiding the fact that I existed. No one in this company knew Derek had a wife, and somehow he'd found it useful to let them believe that. I didn't sigh. I didn't clench my hands. I just looked at the sign for another beat, and my mind automatically drifted back to a few weeks earlier, at a time when I still thought everything was calm. Back then, I was still Ariel Ward, a brand strategist used to studying human behavior through the smallest reactions. The job made me notice what felt off faster than most people, but that didn't mean I always wanted to see it. I preferred to believe Derek was simply a private person who kept family life out of work. That's what he always said whenever I asked about his office. His answer was always neat. It's a high-pressure environment. No need to pull you into it. I believed him. Believed the way someone does when they want to keep a marriage light and free of demands. I still remember the day I told Lara, my closest coworker, about it. She just shrugged. Tech companies have weird cultures sometimes, but hiding a wife sounds off. I laughed it off. I didn't think much of it. Lara sees things sharply, sometimes a little too harshly when it comes to men, so I let it slide. But a few weeks ago, small things started brushing against my instincts. For example, Derek almost never answered my calls during work hours. Fine, plenty of companies ban personal phones. But what was strange was that whenever a coworker called him, he'd step out of the living room, go all the way onto the balcony, or head down to the car. The way he avoided being overheard was too clean, too practiced. Then came the company events. He always talked about them like they were gatherings not meant for outsiders. When I gently asked, "Could I go with you sometime?" he always gave reasons that sounded reasonable enough, but kept repeating themselves. "I've got an internal presentation that day. The team's getting audited. Everything's tense. The office is having half the floor remodeled. It's a hassle to get around." Someone telling the truth doesn't need that many rotating excuses, but I let it go. Because I chose to respect his space. Because a marriage doesn't need to dissect every detail. At least, that's what I believed. Even when Lara happened to send me a post from Derek's company Instagram, where he stood in the middle of his coworkers under a caption that read, "Our single rising stars," I still didn't react right away. I only asked Derek that night gently, "I thought you said your company didn't use social media." He just looked at the screen and shrugged. "They just made the account. I didn't really notice. You know me. I don't care about that stuff." I looked into his eyes. He didn't flinch, didn't fumble, just a little too calm. If I weren't trained to read people, I might have believed it completely. But that calm felt like someone who'd rehearsed the line. I stayed quiet. Then came the night Derek left his employee badge on the car seat. I didn't plan on checking it. I only meant to bring it up to him the next day. But when I picked it up, I saw an extra tag clipped to the back. Family Day, Guest Pass. I'd heard of companies hosting family days, so employees could bring loved ones to visit. But Derek had never mentioned it. Not once. I held the badge for a few seconds. No rush of emotion, no sadness, just that faint, cooling feeling in my veins. A small pause, enough for me to decide one simple thing. Tomorrow, I'd stop by his office. No warning, no call. I just wanted to see where I actually stood in his work world. And now, here I am, standing in front of the sign that says, "Spouses must check in for verification," realizing that my place is 0. I didn't need anyone to explain anything. I didn't need to dig. The way the receptionist glanced at me like I was a complete stranger was enough to pin down one truth. If I said I was Derek's wife, half the office would probably be shocked. I set my bag down and took a quiet breath. I came here just to return something my husband forgot. But what I found was proof clearer than any suspicion. Derek didn't want anyone at work to know I existed. I wasn't angry. My mind just felt sharper than usual. The rest, I'd let myself observe, the same way I used to analyze the brands I managed, look at behavior, not words. And Derek's behavior was telling a completely different story. After the moment I stood in front of that sign, one thought kept echoing in my head. Every small signal I once brushed aside was coming back, clearer and colder. I didn't rush inside. I let myself remember each detail, like a silent inventory of all the ways Derek had chosen to hide me from his world. The first sign I noticed happened on a completely ordinary evening. I remember Derek answering emails on his work laptop. When I called him, his phone lit up, but he didn't pick up. I didn't think much of it. But later, when he handed me his phone so I could read a message about a doctor's appointment, I accidentally saw his recent call log. And my name wasn't there. He hadn't deleted everything. He'd only deleted calls from me. Careful, selective, precise. I didn't say a word. I wanted to listen to what my intuition had to say instead of whatever he'd offer as an explanation. Another night, Derek mentioned a small office party. I asked a few more questions, not out of curiosity, but because I wanted to picture the environment he spent 8 hours a day in. But he only described it in ways that made me feel like my presence in those spaces didn't belong. The vibe is kind of tech, bro. You wouldn't be comfortable. We mostly talk about projects. You'd be bored. Guests are usually industry people only. His words sounded like he was trying to protect me, but his tone felt more like he was protecting his own image. I tried asking if anyone ever brought their spouses to company events. Derek just said quickly, "Hardly ever." Later, I learned that was one of many things he didn't tell the truth about. The third sign was small but sharp. Every time a coworker called, even if he was sitting right next to me, Derek would stand up, walk to the living room, then go even farther, all the way down the stairs. He never took a call within my earshot. Once, I asked quietly, "Do I bother you?" He smiled. "No, I just don't want to bring work stress into the house." A reasonable answer, reasonable enough that I couldn't argue. But a reason repeated too many times stops feeling natural. The sharpest detail came from Lara. That night, I was washing glasses when I heard my phone vibrate. Her message was short. "Look at this. Don't panic." It was an Instagram post from Derek's company, an internal event. He was standing in the center of the frame, hands in his pockets, smiling with confidence. Below it was the caption, "Our single rising stars." I stared at it for a long moment, not because of the photo, because of the word single. A comment underneath said, "He's single? Wow." I remembered clearly that Derek once said he hated social media, that he never let the company tag him. But there he was, right in the center of the photo, like he belonged there more than anyone else. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt a cold crease run through me, like the thought something isn't right had suddenly turned into a voice. When Derek came home that night, I didn't show him the picture. I just watched, the way he set his keys on the table, the way he opened the fridge for water and asked me the familiar question, "Good day?" The way he looked at me, oddly calm, the way he didn't hold eye contact for long. People who lie don't shake. They just try to stay exactly controlled. The event that pushed me to show up at his company started with one simple sentence. The night before, I told Derek I had an appointment near his office, and if it worked out, I could swing by and bring him lunch. His reaction was so fast it slipped. No need. The company's getting audited. Security's super strict. The words came out too quickly. A normal person would have found a softer reason. I didn't push. I just nodded. But later that night, while putting away his coat, I found something that shouldn't have been in the inner pocket. A badge with a green border, bold letters printed across it. Family Day, guest pass, family day, for loved ones only, and definitely not for someone single. I turned the badge in my hand. It felt like holding a small piece of evidence sharp enough to cut through every explanation he'd ever given me. Derek didn't just hide me. He'd built an entirely different version of himself at work, one without a marriage. I didn't argue. I didn't tell anyone. Only one thought slid through my mind. So he feared my presence enough to build an entire story around avoiding it. The final cut wasn't the badge itself. It was realizing how many excuses I'd accepted that should have raised questions long ago. The next morning, I went to his company. No warning, no text, no intention of making a scene. I just wanted to see with my own eyes the place where Derek had chosen to erase our marriage as if it had never existed. And then I saw the sign, "Spouses must check in for verification." I understood everything had reached a limit. Not my limit. The limit of basic respect in a relationship. From that second on, every small unfairness I'd brushed aside lined up in a row, neat, clear, silent. I stood in the lobby feeling empty but alert. Not empty from hurt. Empty because the truth had shed its last layer. He'd worked hard to keep me outside the story he told everyone at the office. That was when I knew. I'd move forward, but not in the way he thought I would. I'd watch. I'd let him open the box he tried to hide, and when the truth came out, I wouldn't need to do anything loud. I'd just stand still. Because sometimes, staying calm is the one voice people fear the most. I stood in front of that sign for a few more seconds before moving on. No hesitation, no second thoughts. I'd spent the whole night wondering if I was overreacting. But standing here, in the place where Derek had chosen to live a different version of himself, I knew there was nothing left to analyze. I walked straight to the reception desk. The receptionist looked at me with polite but distant eyes, the kind that said I didn't belong here. I set Derek's things on the counter and spoke in a steady voice. "I'm Derek Ward's wife. I'm here to drop something off for him." The words landed lightly, but her reaction didn't. She blinked just once, like she'd heard something that didn't make sense. "His wife?" She glanced at her screen, then repeated, "You said wife?" I nodded, my expression unchanged. She studied me for another beat before saying the sentence that froze the air. "You mean his ex-girlfriend?" That wasn't an accident. It was a small, sharp blade, just enough to expose the truth Derek had been hiding. "I'm his wife." I said it again, slow and clear, without emphasizing anything. She looked briefly unsettled and checked the file in front of her. "I'm sorry, but here it says Mr. Ward is single." That was the first twist. Not a shock, just confirmation. Derek had told HR he was single. I didn't react. I didn't scoff. I didn't show any discomfort. I just stayed silent long enough for the receptionist to grow uneasy. "If you can wait a moment, I'll call him down." Her voice softened, almost apologetic. I stepped back so I wouldn't block the counter. The lobby was bright and calm. People passing by with the pace of those who had things to do. And then another small detail appeared, unintentional, but more than enough to snap the last pieces into place in my mind. One of Derek's co-workers walked by. He glanced at me, not really noticing me, just overhearing Derek's name. And he smiled at the receptionist. "Ward has a visitor? That's odd. I thought he wasn't dating anyone so he could focus on getting the senior lead spot." I heard every word. Not dating anyone. What Derek told the company was one thing, but the fact that his co-workers believed it meant he hadn't just filled out a form wrong. He had repeated that story until it became truth to everyone around him. I straightened up. No pain, no shock, just the sense that the final layer of fog had lifted, leaving the full picture. Derek had presented himself at work as a single, focused man with no attachments. I don't know how they contacted him, but I heard hurried footsteps before I saw him. Derek appeared at the stairwell nearby. He saw me, and in that moment, his face lost color, as if someone had switched off every light in his mind. "Ariel?" His voice wavered, like he hoped the person in front of him was a hallucination. I didn't answer that question. I just looked at him long enough for him to know I wasn't here to cause a scene. I didn't come for an explanation. I came to show him the consequence of the story he built himself. When Derek got close, I said the only line I'd brought with me since I walked in. "How long did it take you to erase me from this place?" My line wasn't loud. It didn't shake. But Derek stepped back half a pace, the reflex of someone who's just been called out on the thing they've tried hardest to hide. He looked at me, then around, then back at me. His eyes darted like he was searching for an exit. It was an expression I'd never seen on him, the look of a man no longer in control of the situation. "Ariel, it's not what you think. I cut him off by doing nothing." Silence. That was enough. And that was when I heard footsteps stop behind me. A woman stood there, tablet in hand, HR badge clipped to her shirt. She looked like she'd been on her way somewhere, but had heard enough to piece things together. "Ward," she said, in the steady tone of someone who'd worked in HR for years. "She said she's your wife?" Derek froze. I didn't look at him. I looked straight at the woman and said, simply, "Yes, I'm his legal wife." No emotion, no bitterness, just a fact. The HR employee looked at Derek, then at me, then down at the file in her hand. I caught the shift in her expression. Subtle, but in a corporate setting, even a small shift carries the weight of a full report. I knew I didn't need to say anything else. The truth had already exposed itself. And what embarrassed Derek wasn't anything I did. It was that someone else had witnessed the moment he could no longer deny it. Derek tried to speak. "Let me explain. This is just a I looked at him one last time, steady and cold. "I don't need you to explain to me." I kept my voice low, but just loud enough for HR to hear. "You should explain it to the company." That line wasn't an attack. It was a mirror placed in the right spot, so he could see himself clearly. The HR woman tightened her grip on the tablet. Derek stood frozen, unsure where to look. In that moment, I felt something clearly. I didn't need to argue, accuse, or raise my voice. I only needed the truth to stand with me. And today, it stood right here in this lobby, in front of more than one witness. That was when I knew. The first part of this revenge arc was done, not through action, but through a calm that cut deeper than anger. I gently picked up the item Derek had forgotten, the thing I originally came to deliver. Then I placed it back into his hand. "Here," I said, "the only thing I brought today. Nothing more." I stepped back half a pace, enough to leave Derek standing alone between two women looking at him with two very different truths. One was the woman he chose to hide. The other was the woman holding the file where he'd lied. As I turned to leave, I heard HR ask Derek a quiet question that hit like a hammer. "Where would you like to explain your marital status first?" I didn't turn back to hear his answer. I didn't need to. I didn't leave the lobby right away. While Derek stood frozen between HR and the eyes of everyone who'd witnessed the moment, I knew the next step wasn't talking to him. It was stepping into the space he'd always kept me out of, HR. I turned to the woman in the gray suit, still holding her tablet. "If possible, I'd like to verify a few things," I said. My voice was calm, so calm I could feel the edge in it myself. She nodded immediately. "Please follow me to HR." I walked ahead, steady, not pausing to see what Derek would do. It wasn't abandonment, it was refusing to stay inside the story he'd built. A new boundary I'd drawn for myself the moment I learned he'd claimed to be single. The HR office was to the left of the lobby, glass walls, bright white lighting. Everything neat, clean, orderly, exactly the kind of environment Derek never wanted me to step into. When the door closed, the HR rep set her tablet on the desk. "You said you're legally married to Mr. Ward?" I handed over my ID, short and clear. "Yes." She didn't take long to check. Just a few seconds, enough to confirm what the entire company had never been told. When she looked up, her expression had completely shifted. Serious, sharp, awake. "Let me be direct," she began. "When an employee reports the wrong marital status, it's considered a violation of family disclosure policy, especially for someone in a management track." "I understand," I said. She studied me for another beat. "Are you here to file a complaint? Or a personal report?" "No," I replied. "I'm not here to accuse him." Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "Then what do you want?" "I just want the truth confirmed," I said, "and I want my name removed from the family insurance program he registered under." I saw her pause, not out of surprise, but because she instantly understood exactly where this hit. People think revenge has to be loud, but this wasn't revenge meant to hurt. This was revenge meant to uncover. She opened Derek's file, a few taps. The screen lit up with his personal information: marital status, single, dependents, 0. She looked at me, tilting her head slightly. He reported having no wife and no dependents. I didn't need to answer. My silence was enough for her to understand that Derek had built his own version of reality, and my appearance today had collapsed it. "You want to withdraw from the insurance plan, correct?" "Yes. And I want to sign the official removal form right here." She printed the document, set it in front of me, placed a pen beside it. I signed my name. Slow, steady strokes. No shaking. She signed her verification next to mine. The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that follows when someone has just placed a marker on a file that Derek had spent an entire year trying to keep intact. No raised voices, just a signature. The HR rep looked at the paper, then directly at me. "I'll have to file a report for providing inaccurate personal information. It's mandatory procedure." I nodded. "I'm not interfering with the company's process." That was the second twist. Not a turn in the story between me and Derek, but a turn between Derek and the company he thought he controlled. I knew this would hit his biggest fear: not losing me, losing the image he'd built here, the unbound man, fully devoted to his career. The HR door opened just as I stood up. Derek appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, like someone chasing after something that had slipped out of his hands. "Ariel." His voice was small, almost pleading. I didn't answer. I simply walked out. But Derek stepped slightly in my way, not touching me, just standing there like a temporary barrier. "Don't sign anything," he said. "I'll explain everything to them. Just don't." I looked at him, not angry, not soft, just carrying the cold tiredness of someone who'd stayed silent for too long. "I didn't sign anything against you," I said. "I only signed what's true." He opened his mouth to respond, but I stepped past him before he could form a sentence. "The truth doesn't need me to protect it," I said quietly. "Only you do." The line landed in the hallway, light, but enough to leave Derek with nothing left to hold on to. I saw the eyes of a few employees nearby. Not curious, just the look of people who just watched a major piece of someone's ephod hit the floor. They didn't know me, but they knew Derek. And they'd heard enough to wipe out the entire, devoted single guy image he'd built. I walked past him, past the HR office, past the lobby, the place where all of this began. No one said a word. Neither did I. I headed down the long hallway Derek once said was not a good place for you to visit. Now it wasn't a place he controlled anymore. It was just a hallway, and I walked through it with my back straight, like stepping out of something I no longer carried with me. No looking back, no checking whether Derek was following. Each step felt light, steady, like I was leaving a sealed room I hadn't realized I'd been living in. The door behind me faded from view. I only heard small sounds, HR talking, Derek's uneven breathing, the uncomfortable silence of someone who'd just been exposed in front of his own coworkers. I didn't need to turn around to see his embarrassment. I knew, and so did the entire lobby. Revenge wasn't the moment I signed the papers. Revenge was the way I walked out of there without taking a single part of him with me. I didn't yell. I didn't demand answers. I didn't try to hurt him. I simply handed the truth back to him, and I walked away before he could cover it up again. That was the moment I felt it clearly. I'd just taken back all the power I'd unknowingly let him hold for the past year. A marriage doesn't end in an HR office, but an illusion does, and I let it fall behind me without even a backward glance. I stepped out of the building before Derek could find enough words to patch up what had collapsed. The glass door closed behind me, and from that second on, the rest no longer belonged to me. Inside, Derek had to face HR, face the eyes now seeing he wasn't the man he pretended to be. Face the file he'd edited himself, every checked box, every single line, every work event he used to reinforce the image of being unencumbered. All of it now sat on someone else's desk, no longer in his control. I didn't need to know what they asked him. I didn't need to know how he tried to defend himself. And I didn't need to know what he was going to lose. I walked out of there with everything that was mine, my calm and my self-respect. He stayed with everything he'd created, a truth he could no longer deny. I walked along the sidewalk, feeling strangely light, as if I left a heavy coat behind in the HR office. My shoulders felt so free I had to ask myself, maybe the thing weighing me down this past year wasn't work, wasn't marriage. It was the effort of trying to believe in a man who didn't have the courage to call his wife. One thought came to me, clear and clean without pain. I didn't lose a husband. I just let go of someone who chose the coward's path. I used to think I needed to fight to keep this marriage, but the moment I signed my name to leave the insurance program, I understood. Some people aren't worth standing beside when the truth finally speaks their name. Derek didn't betray me with another woman. He betrayed me by erasing me from the life he wanted others to see. A quiet betrayal, but enough to kill trust. When I stopped at the parking lot, a lightness spread through my chest, the first in months. Not because I'd escaped, but because I no longer had to strain myself to understand him, protect him, or patch the holes he created. That was my self-respect returning, clear enough to feel like breath. I told myself one thing, not to remember it, but to close this story in the most honest way I could. He was afraid of me showing up. I was only afraid of staying. I opened the car door, put my hand on the wheel, and knew that once I drove out of this lot, I wouldn't be carrying any version of Derek with me. He could deal with HR, with his coworkers, with the image he tried so hard to maintain. But none of that had anything to do with me anymore. I wasn't there to hear his explanations. I wasn't someone he could blur out. I wasn't a name he could erase from a form. I was just myself, and for the first time in months, that was enough. Before starting the engine, I looked straight ahead and said one line in my head, like a message for anyone watching this story. If the person you love chooses to hide you from their entire world, do you really want to stay? If the person you love chooses to hide you from their entire world, do you really want to stay? Tell me what you think. I'd like to hear your perspective, even if it's just one sentence. Thank you for being here until the end of this story. Thank you for listening, staying, and giving me a piece of your time. I'll see you in the next one.